Hey, hello, and welcome to another edition of Mobile Internet Resource Center Live, or MIRC Live, where we actually broadcast live on YouTube and talk about cool and interesting topics, and sometimes with a guest. And well, I'm Chris Dunphy, one of the co-founders of the Mobile Internet Resource Center, and our guest today is Dan Heming, who has been on our team for quite a while, and we've kind of made him our Starlink guru. He's been living the Starlink life since the very, very, very beginning, and we have him play with and test all the gear. So, Dan, you want to say hi and describe a little bit about your RVing life?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dan. I've been RVing since 2017 full time. Currently in a truck camper most of the year, and I'm very, I really boondock and stay at these remote locations. So Starlink has been a great addition to all the cellular networks that I carry around. And I've had the Mini now for a month or two. Been able to play with it, put it alongside the Gen-3. I've owned all generations of hardware except for the flat HP. I've had the Gen 1, the Gen 2, the Gen 3, and now the Mini. And so it's great to compare them and tell you a little bit more about them this evening and what we think of them and
Yeah.
answer your questions about them. So,
Yeah, so today's focus in particular is comparing the Starlink Mini, which is still very, very new, versus the Starlink Standard. Not the Starlink Standard that so many people are still familiar with, the Starlink Standard actuated, the one that's on a stalk with a motor. That's still around. That's what we have on top of our boat. But the Standard that's been around since then. So the Standard and the Mini, as you see in the photo of you holding them both here, they're very physically similar. One is, well, just mini. It's a smaller flat wedge. And we're going to talk about what makes them different and everything else between them, and how they perform differently, and whether the trade-offs people will want to weigh considering the choice between the two of them. But first, for those who haven't been paying attention, just what on earth is Starlink? Dan?
uh, st- oh yeah, I'm sorry. So Starlink is broadband internet. Elon Musk, of course, this is SpaceX, company, or part of SpaceX, and there's now a little over 6,300 satellites, low Earth orbit satellites launched and flying around us, and so the dish connects to those, and you're every few minutes you're changing to a new satellite, and this sometimes kind of confuses people. People are used to the old Dish Network TV or the Direct TV, where the satellites were geostationary. This one, your dish is following these satellites as they fly across the sky, overhead. And so you do need a pretty good view of the sky to have uninterrupted service. And
Right.
so we'll go into that a little.
Yeah.
So that's one of the differences on Starlink. So yeah,
Yeah,
Chris.
that is something we still see people confused about, is they think the old school satellite mentality, where they've got the more parabolic dishes that are aimed precisely, and you could actually go to a campground and aim between the trees and get your satellite TV or your more old school satellite internet, and it would work. But because the Starlink satellites are much lower and they're whipping across the sky, that's why you need that big field of view, and the dishes need to track them. And what's kind of amazing is these dishes that just cost a couple $100 are they're flat, uh, uh, flat panels that actually track the satellites in motion. The dishes don't move, but the satellites are being tracked by the array of small, tiny antennas inside of there. And that kind of technology used to be basically super high-end military technology, that when these kind of antennas first started coming out for consumers, they were $25,000, and now you can get that sort of tech for, so, just a few $100. And
Mhm.
SpaceX at first was actually losing a lot of money on every single dish he sold. Now they're still actually able to make a profit and still sell them at that price. So s- pretty impressive constellation. Starlink is way ahead as far as bringing out this kind of technology as a low Earth orbit constellation. Of course, there are other ones out there like OneWeb, and Amazon's Kuiper is coming along. But right now, Starlink is the game in town when it comes to low Earth orbit satellite broadband, and they've built a pretty impressive system. So now let's kind of dive into what's different about the Standard and the Mini. These are the kind of the two choices that people need to weigh. And here's kind of the deep dive tech spec difference. And you want to just kind of talk about the differences one at a time fairly quickly, explain them.
Yeah. So both of these, the standard dish and the mini have gotten rid of the motor. It's no longer needed that the dish needs to. Well, one is it reduced the cost of the hardware, but now there's so much, many satellites in the sky that They can be aimed a certain direction, or they could even be flat, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. Dish dimensions, you can see that the Mini's about half the height, a little more than, about 2/3 the width. Uh, Weight, it's about one-third the weight. There is some Wi-Fi differences. We're really going to get into that. The standard, you have a separate router. The Mini has an embedded router, and it's Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 5. You've got the power supply on the standard, and then on the Mini, it's DC powered with an AC adapter, and we can go into more details on that. They both maintain the same field of view, 110 degrees. This is a little better than the Gen 2, which was 100 degrees. It's still less than the flat HP, which is 140. But we're really not going to discuss that one too much today. Both of them are outdoor rated. And then the big one that comes into play a lot is their power use. The Mini definitely saves power. It's about half the power use of the Gen 3, 25 watts versus 50-55. Snow melt bumps that up even higher, and then price. If you were paying attention just recently, the standard had been on sale for 299 for quite a while. Just went back to 349, and the Mini's still 599. So it's still a more expensive dish, even though it's smaller, just because demand is, so.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in other markets, like internationally, Starlink has actually been pricing the Mini below the price of the Standard. So we know the Mini was designed to be as low cost to manufacture as possible. But just right now in the U.S., because it's more of a niche market at going to the Mini, they're actually pricing it higher. So maybe someday they will reverse that, but we've definitely seen the prices in other countries where the Mini is the cheap model. But
Mhm.
the big difference though is the physical size, and I think that's what we got in here. Is you can see the three different Starlink dishes, the flat high performance, which again that's $2,500, and it's not really of interest to our audience anymore. It has some performance advantages, but not worth the cost difference. Um, Compared to the standard, compared to the mini, and the mini is you've actually got one. It's about the size of a laptop, so you can carry this with you in a backpack. It makes it's actually portable. The standard is it's luggable. You can carry it around, but you're not going to carry it with you on a hike. And
Yes.
well, it's you're not going to be able to power it on a hike. You're not going to be able to do all those other things. So the mini kind of makes Starlink really truly portable. It's a lot easier to install and mount onto a vehicle too, because it takes up less space. But then now, what are going to be the trade-offs of going to that smaller size? Or what are the downsides? And that's kind of what our talk today is going to be focusing on: is what's the differences. And
Mhm.
first off, let's just talk about what's the differences about what's included in the box. So this is what comes in the box when you get a Starlink Mini right here. So talk about all these pieces.
So obviously the dish itself you can see in the kickstand, and that's kind of the general way most people would probably use this is with the kickstand. They do include the pipe adapter with the Mini, which is kind of nice because that's not included with other hardware. There is a 50-foot DC power cable, and Starlink supplies you with an AC adapter, and that AC adapter is actually the same AC adapter they send if you order the Mesh Gen 3 router. Um, Early on, this confused people because the Mini is supposed to be DC powered, but that 50-foot cable and trying to use 12-volt power actually doesn't work. There's too much voltage drop. So people have been figuring out very quickly that they can shorter power cable, a little bit thicker. They can power directly from a cigarette lighter or batteries from drills. So that's
Yeah.
pretty neat to be able to power just from about anything you can find. So
Yeah, the Starlink Mini can be powered of voltage between like 12 volts and 48 volts, I think is the range of voltage it can take. But yeah, the catch that a lot of people who aren't kind of tuned with electricity is voltage drops over cable length. So a long cable, if you start with 12 volt, by the time it gets to the mini, is no longer 12 volt. And people who are trying to do that direct wire will be like, it's not working. So shorter cable, or you can use just a little voltage converter that will convert 12 volt to 24 volt, and then run 24 volt over the cable if you want to have a long cable to the mini. So either cut the cable, make it shorter, use the AC power supply. Starlink, have they started shipping their USB adapter cable?
they
Um,
have. They actually
yeah,
have started. So that's a 100-watt, 20-volt USB cable, I think it is,
yeah,
and people are
yeah,
learning what it works with. Apparently, it's a little. Some batteries that's output USB power are not powering it very well. So people have been experimenting with that. Listing what it does work with and what it doesn't. So
Yeah. So yeah, so you've got a lot of flexibility of how to power it, which is really kind of cool there. And there are third-party accessories coming out too that will let you power it in other interesting ways, like even overpower over Ethernet. But those accessories, I'm not sure are actually on the market yet, but we know they're coming. Now, looking at the Starlink Standard is kind of very different from the Mini in the sense that the dish is bigger, but inside the Mini, there's a router, actually a Wi-Fi router inside the casing of the Mini. So that's why you only need to bring power to the Mini. Whereas the Starlink Standard has a router, a power supply, and the Starlink system itself. So you've got kind of three components, and this is what comes in the box there. And
Yep.
you see,
And
and
yeah, Starlink, they ship a 50-foot Ethernet cable with the Gen-3, and that Ethernet cable, if you were going to hook up the Mini to an external router, that same cable actually can work. It fits both of those. It's the same type of connection.
yep.
Gen 3 router, that's Wi-Fi 6, and the AC adapter is actually pushing out DC power through the router, then powering it over PoE over to the dish. So
Yep. Yeah, so that's why the cable that goes to, and I think actually the next slide is the cables here. So the
yeah,
cable that is going to the Starlink system, in the case of the Starlink Standard, it is just an Ethernet cable. It is a data cable that is also carrying power. It's power that is jacked up to 48 volts, and it's not really compatible with most normal PoE systems. You really need to use something that has been made for Starlink because it uses more power than normal PoE systems typically can put out. But it is power over Ethernet, and that's what the Starlink box is, the power supply is putting out, and that is what there are third party ones that will power it off of DC. So they'll take your 12 volt or 24 volt RV or both DC system and up the output voltage to 48 volts for the special power over Ethernet that it needs. So there are ways to power a Starlink Standard off of DC, but it's not necessarily the simplest thing in the world. Whereas the Starlink Mini, you've got on the left, all it is just a two-wire positive and negative barrel connector on either end, just power cable. It is not Ethernet. There's no data flowing over that cable at all.
yep. And that AC adapter actually outputs 30-volt DC. And I think someone asked those. That's a 5.5 by 2.1 barrel connector. So it's very common, although you usually don't have the extra rubber piece for waterproofness, but it's a very common barrel connector that you can purchase. So
Yeah, yeah. So that is an important thing to keep in mind if you are putting the Starlink Mini out. And you want to do your own wiring, is figuring out how to waterproof it if you're not using their cables that have those kind of rubber seals on either end. Their own Ethernet. It's a standard Ethernet cable, but it's got that special rubber seal. And it's a standard barrel connectors, but it's got that little rubber seal. So look for accessories that either have that, or figure out your own way to either cut a cable and or add your own waterproofing. Now here's like how the cables like just fit in is on the bottom of which one is which? The standard's on the left, right?
there's on the left. So we're showing the back of the router that the where the Ethernet cable would come out of the port or going into the router and into the dish, and then so this is your most general connection, to connect the dish on the Gen 3. You're connecting the router to the dish and giving power to the router. On the Mini, you're literally just plugging in power, those two power connectors, and you're up and running on the Mini. So that's
Yeah.
pretty convenient for sure.
Yes. Okay. And then yeah, so this is the other side of the standard where you're plugging it in to the power supply there, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, the optional power supply. Yep.
Yeah.
So
And now talking about the routers there, and well, there's also, we talk about the Mini only needs power, but it does still have an Ethernet port. It can't take power over Ethernet without, at least not without a third-party accessory that splits power and Ethernet separately. But it has an Ethernet port behind that little white rubber plug on the white, so you can still get wired Ethernet out of a Mini. And we're going to talk a lot about that because using the Ethernet instead of the built-in router is a huge advantage with the Mini. And so we want to compare the just the specs of the routers that are with each one.
yeah, so the Starlink Gen 3 is a tri-band 4x4 MIMO. It's a Wi-Fi 6 router. It actually has great range, even better range than the original, than the standard Gen 2. And they rate it here at 3,200 square feet. It does have two Ethernet LAN ports, which are the middle where that yellow cable is. So you can connect your own router if you want to bypass a Starlink, or even connect directly wired to a computer. And then, of course, the WAN port is actually on the left side. And as
Hmm.
Chris on the Mini, it's Wi-Fi 5. Again, this was kind of probably power savings and stuff. It's a dual band 3x3 MIMO antenna. The Mini's Wi-Fi range is definitely kind of that's kind of a handicap of the Mini. We're going to get into that. It's right at 1,200 square feet. It can fall off very quickly when you start moving the dish away from your devices. So we're going to talk about that. We did some tests. We're going to bring that up, and that was a pretty surprising to me how much that actually affected it.
Yeah.
And then as there's an Ethernet LAN port. That little white plug kind of keeps it waterproof when it's not in there. Um, I went ahead that when you see in the picture, I actually broke off the little. I wasn't using the standard Starlink cable. I broke off the little locking pin because it does go so far into the dish, and it had a little rubber coating that actually held it in there, so it worked pretty good, and I didn't have to worry about it getting stuck. So
Nice. Yeah, and it is actually pretty disappointing that then Starlink brought out the Mini that they did go with Wi-Fi 5 because Wi-Fi 6 has been out for a very long time and Wi-Fi 7 devices are actually starting to show up. So it was probably just a cost savings thing to get the Mini as low cost as possible. But it does kind of limit its overall Wi-Fi throughput. But then again, that's all the more reason to just forget about the Wi-Fi in the Mini when you use the built-in Wi-Fi when you're taking it portable. If you're taking it hiking, it's great. You don't need to have a second router. You don't need to carry a router around with you. But if you're anywhere where it matters, using that Ethernet port is going to really pay off. And just use a real router, a more professional router, and don't use the router that's built into the Mini. And now, one of the things is like the changes that they made from the old standard actuated was it had that little robotic arm. Then the Starlink would spin and aim and pick its direction. It wouldn't track satellites live. It would lock into a direction when you first powered it up, and it would stay there. And the new Starlinks, the new standard and the Mini, they still want to be aimed, but there's cost savings. They got rid of the motor and they just ask you to do it. But the important thing here is aiming. Now that there's enough satellites, aiming isn't nearly so important, so that you could almost sort of ignore that process, right? That's been kind of your testing.
absolutely. Yeah, some days if I right now I've got my Gen 3 mounted, but I've gone between having it mounted and not. And some days I would literally just put the Gen 3 up on my RV roof, just set it down flat. It's less likely to catch the wind anyways. And you can see the picture on the right. It's laying flat. It's not it's telling me the tilt is incorrect. It still works fabulous. I've done the same with the Mini. So and also, we'll talk about mounting these. I do keep my Gen 3 sometimes mounted on my roof, and it can't be aligned. You're not going to turn your RV to face a certain direction. So um, you just run with it. And really, I'm finding that the speeds and the connectivity is no problem.
Right.
And if Chris wants to go to the next slide, I even tested this pointing 180 degrees the wrong way and it might not be perfect, but it's still connected. So this really is not at all an issue. You can, if you just kind of know what direction is north, set the Mini up, kind of aim it north, and if you want to later go back and tweak it, go ahead. But you can see in these pictures, I had it 180 degrees the wrong way,
Yeah.
90 degrees the wrong way, and I was still getting great service. So
Yeah, the if you have a house or you're having someplace that you're doing a fixed long-term installation, spend the few minutes to give whether you have the Starlink Standard or the Mini, give it will have basically more satellites to track. What it's doing is it wants to have its 110-degree field of view facing in the direction the app will steer you towards, face it in the direction that there's the most potential satellites, so it'll have the most potential connectivity and probably also the most immunity to obstructions and stuff because there's more satellites in the direction to be facing. But if you're doing this on a vehicle, flat is great or slightly like a 10-degree angle because that will let water and debris and anything else come off of it. Because water, if you have it completely flat, rain will really hurt your signal. But slight angle so the water can drain is the way it goes. And that's actually the way the Starlink mounts, which I think we're about to talk about. Hold thing by default is they give it just a slight angle. So don't worry about aiming too much.
before we go into this slide, Chris, I was going to say I've experimented. I was at a location that I had a very high tree line to one side of me, and I experimented with turning the dish away from the tree line. And while my overall speeds were kind of lower, my connectivity stayed more. Actually stayed connected more often
Hmm.
because the dish really couldn't look towards the tree line very well, so it was forcing it to look the other way. I mean, not really forcing it, but I changed the view that it could see, and it seemed to actually
Yeah.
work better in some way. So that's something to experiment with. If you do find yourself in trees, don't be afraid to experiment with the dish and point it away from the instructions and see how it does, or lay it
Yeah.
flat and see how it does. You might be surprised.
Cool.
But yeah, as we move on to the mounts here, Starlink has mounts for, they have mobility mount for both the Gen-3 or the standard and the mini. We have a video that I did on the mobility mount for the Gen-3, and I have it mounted on my RV right now. And I have the little mobility mount for the mini. It's pretty small. This is meant to screw down to something, and the dish can actually lay on here. And the nice thing about both of these mobility mounts is the dish will easily snap off the mount. So if you do find yourself parked, you don't have a choice, you're parked in the trees, you can disconnect the dish from the mount, put the kickstand back on it, put it on a pole mount, and mount it up. But the rest of the
Hmm.
time, it can live on your RV or your boat.
Right.
And then the other they have up there is for the mini is it is a roof
Root.
rack mount, and so
Hmm.
between these little the roof rack would go between these, and you can flip this bar over 180 degrees to give you more space, and it would lock on kind of like the picture would lock onto some sort of roof rack. So on a van, maybe on a boat, you have something like that, and gives you some more options. And these mounts run between $35 to $55, so they're very reasonably priced.
Yeah,
So
we're really excited about using a mount like this that we could put it on top of our van and then just pop it off and take it with us when we're going away from the van. Having something that you could just quickly detach, and I think the portability of the Mini and how easy it will be to just take it away, I think is going to be a really great win there.
absolutely.
Okay. Now, power usage is one of the most significant differences, and you've tested and metered them both, and I think you've seen that basically over 24 hours, it's about half the power consumption for the Mini.
Absolutely. The Mini is definitely a much lighter user on power, so 600 watt hours or so. Um, Versus the standard, I'm getting 1.25. Now, this is like kind of baseline. This is just normal usage, nothing heavy. If you use it more, you might see, of course, higher uses than this. Um, if you are somewhere you don't need to leave it on at nighttime, you can turn it off at night. And so on that bar graph on the left, some of those lower mounts were where I turned it off at night just to save power. So that's certainly a way.
Yeah.
Both Starlink dishes have a sleep function, and that does save some power. But really, the best power saving is turning it off completely, because that stops all power usage from happening
Yes.
at all. So
Yeah, we actually have a Siri shortcut, a smart plug that we could just tell it to turn on and off the Starlink, and because particularly the Starlink Standard burns a lot of power if you're trying to live off grid, off solar. It really, we know have boating friends who really have to be rationing their Starlink usage when they're out cruising and sailing and stuff because the Starlink Standard can use so much. And that's a huge advantage of switching to the Mini is that power savings you will have. And now now we come to the trade-offs. It's like, what is the downside of switching to the Mini? What is the trade-offs you're going to have? You've got some questions here, so we're going to go through these. It's like, does one of them have a higher top speed? Well, I think
yeah, absolutely. The standard dish absolutely has a higher peak performance, but it doesn't mean the minis not adequate. And we're going to talk about specific speeds. We'll get into that a couple more slides here. So certainly, if you're all about performance, the standard dish is certainly going to outperform the mini, but it is higher power use and some other. They do have the same field of view, but of course, it's got more antenna array elements in there. So there's some advantages
yeah,
there. And certainly, as I did my testing, pretty much consistently on download, the standard outperforms the mini on pretty much
yeah.
every time you run it.
But you'll
So
be surprised at how little that is. We'll get to that in just a second. Now, the other question is does which plan you have play into your performance? And that's always been the case with Starlink.
absolutely. So the Roam plans, there's a 50 gigabyte plan, there's a Roam Unlimited plan. These are deprioritized plans. So you are at the bottom tier and you are deprioritized behind other service levels, behind residential users on standard, and even mobile priority and priority users. So you're going to see this depending on your area. Some areas are, higher congestion. You're going to see this during peak time, which generally is the evening time when people are streaming.
Mhm.
You're going to see that hit. And both dishes kind of respond, equally. Again, they each both drop down some. Again, the standard tends to still perform a little better, but it really is the plan that is bringing them down, and not so
Right.
much the dish.
Right,
So
and that so in congested areas, they're both going to take a hit, and sometimes in some places, I mean, Starlink's network keeps getting better and better, and congestion has improved, but there are still some places and sometimes, and we hear reports from people where Starlink can be frustratingly slow in some certain congested areas. So that's when people have the option of turning on, get switching to a plan that has priority data, where they're then paying by the gigabyte, but they're now at the top of the line and they have that highest potential speed on the network. And if you really need it, particularly if you're doing something that requires a lot of upload or a lot of really reliable data, turning on priority and just paying for it is an option to keep in mind, depending on your plans and stuff. And,
absolutely.
just yeah. Now, does one dish handle obstructions better than another? And you
Well,
don't
this
have
is kind of tough.
yeah.
Yeah, this has been a little tough. I was in a location that we had some obstructions. I was near Mount Rainier, and I played around with this, and it was a little hard to tell. I do think the edge goes to the standard. They have the same field of view, but obviously the standard has it's a bigger dish, it's bigger antenna array. What I saw more than handling obstructions was I saw it was more consistent. It seemed to be more consistent speeds where the mini would be like get a good speed test, and then it would fall on its nose because obstructions had kicked in or something. And so the mini, I fought a little bit more with the mini with that, but I won't say that it's not like
Mhm.
one's gonna do way better than the other. Obstructions are still obstructions. Starlink is not immune to that.
Yes.
um, Even though people they can see, like, you could be in trees and you could get a speed test that's 200 megabits per second, but then your next test, when the obstruction is actually playing into things, it may drop off.
Yeah.
And so I
And
think that's sometimes what people miss.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the big thing, and I think we'd like to do some more future testing. Is this is the place where obstructions really come into play? Is things like this, like particularly doing any sort of live two-way interactive, particularly video, is those little obstructions, those glitches that can, if you're teaching a class on Zoom or doing a webinar or something like that, those are the obstructions that could be really frustrating. Totally aside from a speed test or something like watching Netflix, which is Netflix does a great job of avoiding obstructions because it has enough buffering that it hides them. You won't know them unless you look at the Starlink app and see that you've had up and down drops. But
Yep.
just in general, and just all the anecdotes we've seen is the standard is a little bit is at least a little bit better with obstructions than the mini, but neither one of them can work miracles because you can't. There's trees and the signal just can't pass through certain things, so you've got that problem. And
Yep.
then the other thing, and this is going to be kind of a focus we talk about the rest, is the router's range. In the Mini, because the router is in the dish itself, if you're putting the Mini out someplace where there's good signal, or you've moved it out away from the trees to avoid obstructions, suddenly now you're at the very edge of its much weaker Wi-Fi radio range. And what sort of range issues did you run into with the Mini, and how far were you able to keep connected?
So the Mini comes with a 50-foot power cord, and I think Starlink might sell a 100-foot, and that's about the limit. Where the standard Starlink sells a 150-foot Ethernet cable. It's a little bit easier to move the standard away from you, and of course you're not affecting the range of the standard because the router's staying near you. So I absolutely did see that the range of the Mini, the router range, was definitely compromised. And the other thing I noticed is it came down to devices. Some devices seem to have better Wi-Fi radios, and they
Mhm.
were able to connect longer. But some devices, man, it fell off a cliff. At 50-foot range, I had some devices that absolutely the service. It was very frustrating to use the Mini because the Wi-Fi range was so bad. In fact, the app warned me a couple times, like, "Hey, you should probably find a better location or move your
Right.
device closer."
And
So that is absolutely a concern. Yeah.
and one additional challenge with that is a lot of RVs and boats and other vehicles are made of metal, and if you're putting your router, your Wi-Fi router on the top of a metal roof, there's a wall of metal between you and that Mini that's broadcasting a Wi-Fi network. You're going to have absolutely horrible Wi-Fi signal inside talking to that Mini, and going to be getting you're throwing away a ton of your potential Starlink performance because of that. But again,
Mhm.
that's where that Ethernet cable can come into play. Is like, well, forget using the built-in router on the Mini unless you're like using it like you often do, where you just put it in the dash of your truck while you're driving around, and it's just right there next to you, and it's in the window of the truck, and hey, that's great. But if you're doing a more serious install and you're putting the Mini up on the radar arch of a boat like we're planning to do, or up on the top of a metal RV or a van, bring in the signal via Ethernet. And we've got some performance numbers, I believe. Oh, this is the
Yeah,
first. You're talking about the range of the Mini, right? These
yeah.
slides. Yeah.
So first slide on the left, this is a Starlink app that you can do an advanced speed test, and people get confused with this. But the two numbers you see, the 55 megabit per second you see on the right, is actually the Starlink dish talking to the Starlink network. That's a speed of the dish communicating with the Starlink satellite. The number on the left is your device, in my case, a cell phone, talking to the dish. And this was a test that I ran with the dish 50 feet away from me, and you can see I was getting 55 down, but I was only getting 26 on between the device and the router. So my speed was limited by my Wi-Fi range. And on the next slide, I was only getting 10.4 megabits per second down. And you can see that one, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a warning there in the bottom that says you need to move your device closer to the router. Your Wi-Fi signal is weak. And then the final slide, you can see I'm still getting 44 megabits per second, but now my router to device speed is up to 225. So that's no longer the bottleneck. So the advanced speed test is really, it's beneficial to run that and see, is it limiting your speed? But we're going to actually show you, I actually thought, hey, my Wi-Fi speed is faster than my internet speed. It's fine. I still got faster speeds once I hooked up an Ethernet cable to
Oh
a
yeah.
router.
Yes,
Quite surprising.
going wired makes a huge difference. So here you've got, I believe the red boxes are speed tests you did with the Mini, and
Mini.
the blue boxes are the Starlink Standard. So this was looking at it over Wi-Fi, right?
Correct. Yeah, over Wi-Fi. And so let's start on the bottom, the diagram on the left at the bottom, because this was timed. So when I first started doing these tests, there was congestion. So I was only getting 2018 down on the Mini, and that was just because of congestion. And I can't see the times, but I think I waited about 45 minutes. And now I jumped up to about 100 down and 31 up, which is very respectable speeds on the Mini. This was over Wi-Fi through the embedded router, but the Mini was very close to me. It was sitting on top of my roof, my RV. Then for comparison, the ones in the blue, I was running the standard dish, and you can see it's running 220, 183, 260, 279. And then we went back to the Mini and we're running 104, 153, 80. Those were very typical speeds during evening, but not congested, that I would see on the Mini. Somewhere between, just under 100 to about 150 is where, I would get to. Um, then as we go over to the right box, this was later in the evening. It was less congestion, and you can see some of my speeds. Surprisingly, this is some of the highest speeds I've seen from the standard, and I'm in South Dakota right now, so very rural area. I started pushing 400 on the standard, which was pretty impressive. The Mini was topping out about 156, 152, 159. Some of the uploads are kind of impressive. Usually the
Yeah.
uploads have been around 20. I pulled a few right near 40. That was kind of impressive. But these are all Wi-Fi connected to the routers directly. So either to the Gen-3 router or the embedded Mini. Now we're going to show you the difference on the next slide, hooking up an Ethernet cable.
This is hugely
And
important.
yeah. So if you remember 150, 155 was my high. Well, look at the red boxes. All of a sudden I'm getting 245, 280, 242, 272 on
You
the
even got a
Mini. Uh,
323 on the Mini. You got over 300 on the Mini.
you get over 300 in the Mini, which absolutely blew me away. And then comparison on the Gen-3 or the standard, we're high 300s. Broke 400 one time, but right up there. So looking at these numbers, the Mini, looking at the Mini performance, it's not quite as fast as the standard, but who's going to complain about getting 250 down on a Starlink disc? So
Yeah. No,
um,
no, no. Again, these
that's
are like kind of like
yeah,
best case numbers in a very non-congested area, but it is really amazing to see something that size that's able to deliver performance like that. It's in the ballpark of the standard at a much smaller size and much less power consumption, which is just absolutely wonderful to see that. But the key is ignore the built-in router, ignore the built-in Wi-Fi, because it's just not they really skimped, I think, on the routing functionality there. So just go straight, go into bypass mode, go Ethernet right out of it.
absolutely. And then just to make sure, I think I ran some more tests. This was so I made some more tests. This was back to back. These and you look at these times. These were only a minute or two apart. Again, in the red, this is with an Ethernet cable hooked up. We're running 274, 238. I unplugged and went back to the Starlink router, the embedded, and I immediately dropped under 200, 171, 183, 164. Now this was pretty early. This was earlier in the morning. Things were not congested. I'm in a rural area, but it goes to show you that the embedded router really does hold back the performance of the Mini.
So yeah,
And
that's
even
yeah. I think that is one of the most important conclusions we want to pass on. Is we've seen a lot of other people who've kind of covered this, and they've poo-pooed on the Mini because of its performance compared to the Standard, but they're comparing the Wi-Fi experience versus the big fancy Wi-Fi router of the Standard system, as opposed to, well, most of our audience, we don't like, you can get a much better router. A lot of our audience uses Peplink routers or other fancy routers that can do so much more, and particularly combine your Starlink signal with a cellular signal so you can bond them together and get more reliability and more speeds. So if you're going to be ditching the built-in router anyway, a Mini can work really wonderfully over Ethernet into a more capable router that's going to let you do other fun things with it.
well, I
So
think I was going to say one more important part that I learned that I think early on in our previous video that we may have had wrong because we were going based on what people had said. You don't have to bypass the Mini router when you're hooking up external router. You can leave it active,
oh yeah,
which means when you plug it, it stays at. You don't have to reset it. There is a reset button. Previously, we thought that it automatically bypassed it, and it
yeah,
doesn't. You can
yeah,
bypass it, but you also can just leave it active so that
right.
when you unplug, it's ready
Yeah.
to go. So.
Yeah, so then we have the kind of the best of both worlds. So you can have it plugged into a more capable router, and then just disconnect it, snap it off, take it with you, maybe hook it up to a USB battery pack, and then you've got a completely portable Starlink that you can take with you, anywhere you might want to go, even with a portable power supply, and then come back to your RV or your boat, snap it back in, plug it back in, and you've got the best possible performance. So I think that makes the Mini kind of a quite the exciting product. It does cost more than the Standard, but it's quite affordable. I Now before we switch, we're about to switch into Q&A mode, so I hope there's some questions queued up. I think there's a few of them in the chat room. If not, feel free to throw them in the chat because we're going to hang out and answer some questions about Starlink Mini versus Standard. Do you have any other concluding thoughts you want to add before you switch to Q&A, Dan?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I will say I was a little skeptical when I first got it, and I was kind of partial to my Standard, but I have grown to really enjoy this dish. The portability factor of it has just amazed me. Like you said, I've taken and thrown the windshield of my truck and driven down the road. People are finding like with Jeeps with hard tops with fiberglass hard tops, they can mount it in there. People are experimenting with mounting the Mini um, uh, like skylights and RVs just to put it up there. And certainly not going to get the best performance, but it's very easy to do that if you find a way to
Mhm.
do that. And now seeing these differences in Ethernet versus Wi-Fi, it's changed my opinion of just having the Mini because of the lower power usage, hooking it up to
Mhm.
Ethernet. It makes a great dish to just, if you don't mind the higher price. Um,
Yeah. Yep.
I think the one
And
thing on the Mini though, Starlink is not letting you do is subscribe to a residential plan on it. So if you were considering the Mini for a house, for both a house and an RV location, while you probably would want to definitely do the external router, I don't think you're going to be able to do the residential plan while you're at your house. So you're
right.
going to be still home plan there.
Okay.
That's probably the only side there. So
Cool. And let's see. The one other slide is just do want to remind people before we start taking the questions is the Mobile Internet Resource Center is member funded. We are not really focused on YouTube ads or affiliates or encouraging people to sell anything. We do these videos as kind of a great way to interact with an audience, but we'd like you to come join us over at the Mobile Internet Resource Center and become a member. You can go deeper with us, interact with us in the forums. Dan hangs out in the forums all the time and is taking questions. We do other webinars that are member only. We have vendor discounts for a lot of things that instead of getting affiliates for kickbacks for us, we have vendor discounts that get passed on to our members. A lot of other great reasons to go join the Mobile Internet Resource Center. So go over to rvmobileinternet.com/membership and check it out if you are interested interested in being a mobile and connected type of person, you'll probably find it worthwhile and worth joining. And if because you watched this video and joined us on one of these lives, you can use the discount code MIRC Live to get a discount on joining us and supporting our work and keeping our team covering all this stuff. But now let's dive into Q&A time. So I think there's a few questions here. Scrolling, I'll start with this one because, and then I'll scroll back to find some other ones. So Mark Sparrows asks, is there a limit to how long the cord to the substitute router to the Mini can be? So the Ethernet cord can be probably 200 or 300 feet. I mean, Ethernet standard, it works very long distances.
I was gonna say I've seen that 300 number pushed around. I would think at least 150 feet, and maybe even longer. I think your biggest issue is going to be the power side because you're either going to have another power source near the dish. The longest that I've seen for the mini dish power is a 100-foot cable from Starlink. So
Right. And
um,
you'll want higher voltage to go over further distances too. So that's where it comes to jumping it up to 48 volts. And now we are aware of kind of PoE adapters for the Starlink Mini that are in development. We know our friends over at Mobile Must Have actually are working on one of these that they hope to bring to market soon that will let you just run a Ethernet cable to a small box that will go to the bottom of the Starlink Mini that will then split out Ethernet and power, so you'll be able to run the Mini over random power by Ethernet, which is going to be a great accessory. Looking forward to seeing that come out. And also, we know third parties that are working on combo Ethernet/power cables that just have the two cables bundled together as one, so you don't have to have it's mostly just cosmetic. You don't have to run two separate cables, the Mini's power cable and an Ethernet cable. You just have one cable that has two wires basically molded together. So there are things coming along that will make using the Mini over Ethernet more elegant. That I think is going to be great stuff. Let's look for other questions here. And
Some about external routers.
Okay. So
I see one from
somebody
Kyle about how. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say somebody wanted to they'll switch to the Mini for the energy savings as soon as the price comes down to $200. Well, if you want that, you can go get one in El Salvador. I think that's what the price is there. So maybe at some point Starlink will adjust the pricing in the US, but it probably will take before until they're no longer supply constrained and they feel that it is a marketing advantage for them. They certainly can manufacture it for cheap enough. So yeah, we'll be kind of curious to see that. Um, there's how long is the DC power cable that comes in the box, and what you can repeat the barrel connector.
Yeah. So a 50-foot cable is what comes with the Starlink Mini. And Starlink sells a 100-foot cable in their store that you could purchase, and then those cable ends are 5.5 by 2.1 millimeters. I think is the dimensions on those, and so that's very. There's a lot of aftermarket Amazon type stuff. You can purchase a smaller power cable if that's what you want to do, or the DC barrel on one side, USB-C on the other side. That's what several people are doing. Just make sure it's a PSD plug or it's got the proper ratings to carry that type of power over the USB connection. So
Yeah, yeah. So people who think that you could just plug it into the USB port on your computer, the USB ports on computers don't put out 20 volts, and they don't put out the high voltage and high power. I think most often, but a lot of external USB battery banks and stuff, the ones that are designed to power a laptop, will power a Starlink Mini over USB-C. So, yeah, that's actually a great way. You can just have a tiny little pocket-sized battery that you can get the Starlink barrel connector, USB-C to the barrel connector, and power your Starlink Mini off of battery wherever you go. I've
mhm.
seen two questions of suggestions for a Peplink router to use with the Starlink Mini, and basically anyone would work. But I think the B1 and or the B1 5G that has integrated 5G, so you can combine the Starlink coming into the B1 over Ethernet with the 5G that is built into it, and suddenly you've got the best of both worlds. You've got Starlink and cellular that you can combine together. But uh,
Yeah.
and you actually have been using a setup like that, haven't you? Or
Yeah, I've got the B1 5G, and I've got my standard coming into that, and then I've also got the BR1 Pro, which is a little more expensive, and that's the one I've been integrating the Mini into, but I could just as easily had the Mini go into the B1, and I've been really happy with that router,
Yeah.
especially. So
And
it's a nice setup.
in our boat here, we have the BR2 Pro with dual 5G modems in it, and we have a Starlink connected to it, but we actually haven't had our Starlink active in quite a while because the cellular coverage on the East Coast where we've been cruising has been fabulous, and we haven't really needed the extra redundancy of Starlink with so much cellular that we have from different carriers going on. So that's that. And I think we might be caught up on questions, so going to end this. Any last call for questions? Otherwise, I hope this has been a fun, informative video. I know Dan has had a lot of fun playing with the Starlinks and putting them head to head, and I think he's become a mini fan now.
Are we getting our
And
mini
I
back?
just, yeah,
Yeah. So actually, Dan, that is the question from us is because you were supposed to send us the mini after you were done with it. Are you going to pass it on, or are you going to hold on to that one and make us get our own? It's,
oh man, it's very tempting to hang on to this one for sure. One thing that I saw brought up a question we kind of touched on today was we didn't really cover the flat HP dish, and we could talk about why we don't really recommend that or why it's not high in our list anymore. Um,
that yeah. Go for
yeah,
it. Yeah,
so
explain because that we actually did have that come up in the chat, I think.
yeah, so the flat HP dish, obviously, when it first came out, it was still very early. It was the first dish not to have motors. It It does have 140 degrees field of view, but it is a $2,500 dish, and it does use a lot of power, even a lot more than a standard dish. And these days, with the amount of satellites in the sky, and I think we covered this, we just don't see the benefit as much. I mean, it is a higher performance dish, but over what the standard and the mini can do for most RVers and cruisers and boaters, it just doesn't seem like that is really beneficial to most people. Now, if you absolutely want to purchase that dish, certainly it can work. It can work well. It doesn't come with a router anymore, so on top of the $2,500 price, you do have to supply your own router for it. And assuming you were going for the HP dish anyways, you would want a high performance router to go with that. So
Right. So the market for there is still certainly a large market for the flat HP, but it is mostly the commercial market. So that's what Starlink is installing on cruise ships and mega yachts, and particularly where behind the scenes the flat HP has a higher duty rating where it can spend more of its more time per second broadcasting and transmitting. So if it's doing long continuous uploads, which it would be doing if it's serving a cruise ship with hundreds of potential people connected at once, it will work better over time. But for most cruiser and RV use, the flat HP has been really eclipsed. And particularly when the flat HP first came out, it was the only one that was certified for use in motion. So if you wanted to be connected legally and officially while underway, even though Starlink never really enforced it against the other dishes, the flat HP was what you needed to put on top of your RV or put on top of your boat. Now, both the standard and mini are fully supported in motion. They're fully licensed and legal for that. And we really cannot think of any case where we would recommend the flat HP anymore. If you have it and you're happy with it, well, great, you've got it, but it is not really of interest. Right now, the two choices are standard and mini. They're both great choices. They're both things to consider. And I think we've explained kind of what all the trade-offs now.
A couple more questions.
Okay, a couple more questions have popped up in here. Jason asks, any info about the DC conversion kits that let the Gen-3 standard run off of DC? Do you save significant power, or is it not because of the DC-DC conversion circuitry?
So, from what I've seen, the power you're really saving is not running an inverter. So, if you're trying to run a minimalist setup off grid and you don't usually run an inverter or run other things in your house, that's where the DC conversion can save you some power. Myself, I keep my inverter on 24/7 the majority of the time, so I'm not going to go through the hassle of changing it. And I see people, there are different kits out there. Yaosheng has a kit that it even accepts the Gen 2. That's actually was for the Gen 2, but I think they make one for the Gen 3 now. Um, they certainly save a little bit of power, but yeah, you're right. The DC-DC conversion, you're probably losing some too. So it
Yeah.
really comes down to what type of setup you're trying to do off grid. If you're trying to avoid having to run an inverter, then absolutely that can save you some power for sure. So
Yeah. The parasitic loads of the inverter can be very substantial, and actually, yeah, we've designed our boat system that we turn off our main inverter most of the time when we don't need it when we're off grid, to maximize our solar and stuff. So in that case, if we wanted to, we've been tempted to do the conversion on our Mini, but we ended up the conversion on our Starlink to convert it to DC. I've actually got all the parts sitting around, but it's again something that we also only use the Starlink because we have cellular as our primary connection. So even when we had the Starlink active, we only used it on special occasions. So it was easy enough to just run it off the inverter when we needed it and not worry about needing the conversion. But all comes down to what is your power setup. It's not so much the power you'll save on the particular Starlink. It's taking a full holistic look at your power usage. And yeah. And we're seeing a lot of people in the chat saying great things, that experiences they've had with the Mini. And yeah, Shane's pointing out it's 15 watts when idle. It is not a big power hog just sitting there. So it's still a lot more than cellular, which might be using only like 2 or 3 watts when it's sitting idle. So it is still not nearly as power efficient as a 5G cellular router setup might be, but it is getting into the ballpark. It is actually a really fabulous product for the mobile market. One other question here. So, since you guys have both units, which would you suggest having as a backup to our standard internet? I like the ease of setting up the Mini, but it seems like the standard gives the best coverage for our house. Do you guys have any thoughts? This is kind of a two-part question from Chris. Uh, as you're using it as a backup to home internet, I mean, either one. It's
Yeah, either one could come into play. I would assume maybe Chris that you have a home router ready, so either one you can bring into your home router system. Um, the standard, of course, does have the external router, and I guess it's is this a backup just for the internet goes down, or when power, when you lose all power in your house? Of course, the Mini would pay off a little bit there, and I guess it would depend on the plan. If it's a backup, are you going to activate it? Are you going to keep it paused and activate on the roam plan, or cancel and activate on residential. So that might play into that a little bit too. So I think either one could come into work, but you would definitely want the external router hooked up if it was the Mini. So
mhm. Cool. And hey, actually, Jeff Spencer popped into the chat. Hey, great, Jeff, to see you there. And he says that the Mini will make a great stocking stuffer for Christmas, and it's not quite that small. I mean, I know,
Big stocking.
yeah, unless he's got big stockings. But I've seen his running shoes, and I guess maybe after he's run 100 miles in them, they might be spread out a little bit big, and he might be able to stuff a Mini in there. But I don't know, get some big stockings. But actually, yeah, I think the Mini could make a good big stocking stuffer. And yeah, we've been hearing good reports of the Mini performing in Tahiti and all sorts of things. I think it's for boats and RVs both. The Mini is a prime choice. We just need to spread the word of you're throwing away so much performance by relying on the built-in router. Bring it into something more capable. Use that Ethernet port and take full advantage of what the Mini can do. Just bypass its built-in lame-ass router that it has in it.
And while we're talking about the Mini on boats, I see the question come up on social media about using it on mobile priority plans, and the Mini can absolutely be used on mobile priority plans. And right now, if you saw the update on the Roam plans, the mobile priority opt-in was supposed to go away October 10th. Starlink has delayed that now until early 2025. So if you even have the Roam Unlimited plan, you can still opt into mobile priority from that.
Right. Yeah. And the mobile unlimited plan and the Roam priority, we love that is sticking around. Again, yeah, it makes it very flexible. Let's see. Oh, and yeah, I guess the other bit of Starlink news is they're probably going to be ramping up their pace of launches even more in going into next year with the Starship coming online. If they actually finally start being able to launch the next generations of much bigger, physically bigger Starlink satellites. So yeah, so, Starlink is basically just on fire, getting better and better across the board. Um, yeah, the Shane's pointing out the only thing downside of the Mini was that we expected it would come in cheaper than the standard because we're cost Starlink less to manufacture. We're almost certain of that, but they're pricing it higher right now. Still, when you think about the technology, when you think about comparative satellite technologies that were basically in the marine market primarily, it is still both the Standard and the Mini are ridiculously cheap compared to anything that was in the same technology field. And yeah, I think we're kind of caught up on questions for the most part. And so, and we've been going for almost an hour now. So this was a really fabulous chat. We had a nice attendance here, and I'm sure that a lot of people will get a lot of value out of this video. So thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your expertise. Hopefully you'll decide to share the Mini with us and send it our way in the near future. And again, I want to remind people to consider joining us and becoming members over at the Mobile Internet Resource Center, rvmobileinternet.com or mobileinternetinfo.com. We'll get you there, and you can come join us. Anything else? Just thank you much, everybody. Cool. Take care.